In the 17th century, a private mercantile enterprise began the process of co-opting and eventually replacing the administrative machinery of the Mughal Empire. This transition was managed not by a national government, but by a joint stock corporation operating out of a small office in London. At the time, the Mughal Empire integrated nearly the entire subcontinent into a centralized political framework. Emperor Jahangir held absolute authority over a wealthy state, backed by a formidable army, while the English merchants of the East India Company were minor outsiders, dependent on his personal favor for trade access. Early ambassadors like the lawyer Sir Thomas Roe spent years at the Mughal court, trying to secure formal, binding commercial treaties. He grew frustrated as imperial officials treated him as an insignificant supplicant, viewing his requests for legal protection as minor matters of personal patronage rather than matters of state. In these early years, the company possessed no military threat. Their entry into India was purely commercial, and their survival depended entirely on Mughal permission and localized agreements. The turning point arrived a century later. In 1717, a company diplomatic mission reached the court of Emperor Farrukh Siyar. After a company surgeon named William Hamilton successfully treated the emperor for a severe illness, the grateful ruler issued a royal farman, or decree. This decree granted the company unprecedented commercial privileges. It allowed them to trade duty-free in Bengal in exchange for a nominal annual payment, and authorized the company to issue dastaks, official trade permits certifying that transit goods were corporate property. While the decree legally excluded individual trade, company servants systematically abused the system. They used these dastaks to evade duties on their own private business and sold them to local merchants, siphoning wealth away from the state treasury. This illicit parallel economy allowed the company to expand its physical footprint. Using these private profits, they began to fortify Fort William in Calcutta, creating a militarized corporate stronghold without the local Nawab's permission. This deprived the Nawabs of Bengal of critical customs revenue and destabilized the regional economy. State officials like Alivardi Khan resisted, but the illicit growth of the company's private economy created deep-seated friction between corporate interests and sovereign administration. This systemic corruption, rather than a direct plan for conquest, provided the spark for colonization. By the mid-18th century, the company had fatally undermined the local government's ability to collect revenue and maintain order. Economic friction eventually led to direct military conflict. At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Robert Clive secured a company victory through a secret conspiracy with the Nawab's own commander-in-chief, Mir Jafar. A similar victory at Buxar in 1764 completed the shift from merchants to masters. The resulting Treaty of Allahabad granted the company the Diwani rights. For the first time, a private corporation held the legal authority to collect land revenue and administer civil justice across the wealthy provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. Under this dual system, the company held the financial authority, but none of the responsibility. They left the puppet Nawab in charge of the expensive work of policing and the judiciary, while the company siphoned off the tax revenue for its own dividends and military expansion.
To maximize extraction, the company ruthlessly restructured land ownership. Systems like the permanent settlement in Bengal and the Rayatwari system in Madras set rigid tax demands that were often revised upward every few years, regardless of droughts or crop failures. Peasants were forced to abandon subsistence farming. To pay these high, inflexible taxes in cash, they had to grow export-focused crops like indigo, raw cotton, and opium, crops that fed the company's global trade network but left the local population without food reserves. This commercialization of agriculture left the rural population vulnerable. Without state investment in irrigation and under the weight of debt to moneylenders, millions perished in catastrophic famines, while the company continued to enforce revenue collections. By weaponizing India's own tax revenue, the company funded its own private army and purchased the very textiles it exported for profit. The corporation had turned the subcontinent into a self-funding machine for its own expansion. As the company looked beyond Bengal, it sought ways to annex remaining Indian states without the expense of a full-scale war. They turned to diplomatic extortion and legal manipulation. They utilized the subsidiary alliance system,
forcing Indian rulers to disband their own militaries and pay for a contingent of company troops stationed within their borders. Rulers who accepted this became kings in name only, losing their sovereignty to the British resident, who became the real authority at court. Later, Governor-General Lord Dalhousie introduced the doctrine of lapse. This policy stated that any princely state under company suzerainty would be annexed if its ruler died without a natural male heir. This deliberately violated long-accepted customs that recognized adopted sons as legitimate successors. By refusing to recognize these adoptions, the company systematically absorbed kingdoms like Satara, Jhansi, and Nagpur, adding millions of pounds to its annual revenue. Through these legal pretexts and diplomatic traps, the company achieved a complete hostile takeover. Independent nations were effectively dismantled and absorbed as corporate subsidiaries. By 1857, the cumulative impact of heavy taxes, forced annexations, and total disregard for local traditions pushed the population and the company's own private army to the breaking point. The immediate trigger was the introduction of the Enfield rifle. Rumors spread that its cartridges were greased with cow tallow and pig lard, a profound cultural insensitivity that fueled fears of forced religious conversion among the company's Hindu and Muslim soldiers. The rebellion began as a mutiny of sepoys at Meerut and quickly escalated into a widespread civilian uprising. The company's massive private army, which it had spent a century building, violently turned against its corporate managers. British forces eventually suppressed the rebellion, but the scale of the uprising convinced the British Parliament that a private company could no longer manage the security and administration of the subcontinent. On August 2, 1858, Parliament passed the Government of India Act. This nationalized the company's assets, abolished its administrative rule, and transferred total sovereign power directly to the British Crown, ending the era of corporate governance. The East India Company's trajectory from a small trading group to a territorial power remains a significant case study in the consequences of granting a profit-driven corporation the powers of a sovereign state.